The tribunal's trapdoor observation deck of the Nexus Station offered a breathtaking view of the Centauri Nebula, its purple and gold gases swirling like cosmic paint across the void. Ambassador Elena Vasquez stood at the reinforced transparent steel window, her reflection ghost-like against the stellar backdrop. At 42, she carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had spent her career navigating impossible situations. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical bun, and her simple blue diplomatic uniform stood in stark contrast to the elaborate robes and ceremonial armor worn by the other delegates wandering the station's corridors. Elena had arrived on the Nexus Station 3 days ago, representing Earth in what was supposed to be a routine trade negotiation. The Galactic Tribunal had extended an invitation for humanity to discuss potential membership in the Outer Rim Commerce Alliance, a development that could transform Earth's struggling economy. After decades of isolation following first contact, this felt like humanity's chance to finally join the galactic community as equals. The station itself was a marvel of engineering, a massive ring-shaped structure that housed diplomatic quarters for over 300 different species. Gravity generators maintained Earth-normal conditions in the human sectors, while environmental controls shifted seamlessly to accommodate the various atmospheric needs of visiting delegations. The central hub contained the Grand Assembly Chamber, where the most important decisions affecting galactic civilization were made. As Elena prepared to head to the morning session, her personal communicator chimed softly. The message was from her aide, Lieutenant James Park, stationed back on Earth. Ambassador, we're detecting unusual subspace chatter. Multiple alien fleets have been moving toward your position over the past 48 hours. Command wants you to be aware. Elena frowned at the message. Fleet movements weren't uncommon during major diplomatic gatherings, but something about the timing felt wrong. She made her way through the station's gleaming corridors, noting the whispered conversations that seemed to stop whenever she passed. Alien delegates who had been friendly just days before now avoided eye contact. The Zephyrian guards, tall reptilian beings with golden scales, watched her with an intensity that made her skin crawl. Their Chancellor, Crix, had been particularly cold during the preliminary meetings, his yellow eyes holding a malice that seemed personal. The Grand Assembly Chamber was a sight to behold, with its domed ceiling displaying a real-time view of the surrounding star field. Tiered seating accommodated hundreds of delegates, with the central speaking platform bathed in soft white light. Elena took her designated seat in the human section, a single chair that seemed pitifully small compared to the elaborate seating arrangements of the major powers. Chancellor Crix rose from his ornate throne, his 7-foot frame commanding attention. His voice resonated through the chamber's acoustic enhancement system as he began to speak. Honored delegates, we gather today not for the trade discussions originally planned, but to address a matter of grave concern to galactic security. Elena's blood ran cold. This wasn't on the agenda. The massive holographic display at the center of the chamber flickered to life, showing what appeared to be surveillance footage of human military installations. Evidence has come to light, Crix continued, that the species known as humans has been conducting illegal military research, stealing advanced technologies from member civilizations, and preparing for aggressive expansion into sovereign territories. Elena shot to her feet. That's completely false. Earth has honored every treaty and agreement we've signed. We've been nothing but cooperative with all member species. Her voice echoed in the chamber, but she could see that many delegates had already made up their minds. The footage continued to play, showing what looked like human scientists working with alien technology, but Elena recognized the subtle editing, the carefully crafted narrative designed to make peaceful research look sinister. Furthermore, Crix's voice rose above Elena's protests. Intelligence suggests that humanity has been developing weapons of mass destruction in clear violation of the Galactic Non-Proliferation Accords. As such, the Tribunal hereby issues a warrant for the arrest of the human representative on charges of conspiracy, technological theft, and preparation for aggressive war. The chamber erupted in murmurs and clicking sounds from various species. Elena felt her hands shake as she realized the scope of the setup. This wasn't about trade or membership. This was about eliminating humanity's voice before they could gain any real power in galactic politics. The timing made sense now. Earth's recent technological advances, their successful defense against pirate raids, their growing reputation for ingenuity and resilience had threatened the established order. Security forces began moving toward Elena's position. The Zephyrian guards were joined by the crystalline architects and several members of the insectoid hive collective. Their various weapon systems hummed to life, creating a wall of hostile intent around the human section of the chamber. Elena stood her ground, her diplomatic training taking over even as her heart raced. "You have no right to do this," Elena declared, her voice carrying across the chamber. "These charges are fabricated, and you know it. This tribunal claims to represent justice and equality among species, but you're nothing more than bullies trying to silence anyone who might challenge your control." The insult hit its mark. Several delegates shifted uncomfortably in their seats, and Elena caught sympathetic glances from representatives of smaller civilizations who had likely faced similar treatment. Chancellor Crix's eyes narrowed to golden slits. "The human will be placed in custody pending a full investigation. Her primitive species has had their chance to prove their worth, and they have failed spectacularly." The guards moved closer, their restraint devices crackling with energy. Elena had seen those devices before. They were designed to cause pain, to break the spirit of the prisoner while leaving no permanent marks. As the first guard reached for her, Elena spoke again, her voice calm and steady despite the circumstances. "You think Earth is defenseless. You think we're just another primitive species you can push around and intimidate." She looked directly at Crix, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "You have no idea what you're dealing with." The restraints locked around her wrists, sending jolts of pain up her arms. The guards hoisted her to her feet and began marching her toward the chamber's security exit. The alien delegates watched in fascination, some recording the proceedings for broadcast across their respective territories. This was meant to be a lesson, Elena realized, a demonstration of what happened to species that dared to reach above their station. As they dragged her past the rows of seats, Elena heard whispered comments from the various delegates. Primitive species never learn. They should have stayed in their own system. This is what happens when you give animals delusions of grandeur. Each comment was like a dagger, but Elena held her head high. She had been trained for situations like this, though she had hoped never to face them. The security corridor was a stark contrast to the grandeur of the assembly chamber. Here, the walls were bare metal, and the lighting was harsh and clinical. The guards forced her into a small detention cell equipped with a basic bench and minimal life support. The energy barrier snapped into place, sealing her inside with a low hum. Through the cell's single small window, Elena could see the docking bays where hundreds of alien vessels were moored. The sight reminded her of how alone humanity truly was in this vast galaxy. Earth had sent only a small diplomatic courier ship, a modest vessel that looked like a toy compared to the massive warships and luxury cruisers of the major powers. But as Elena sat in her cell, she wasn't thinking about Earth's apparent weakness. Instead, she was thinking about a conversation she'd had with Admiral Morrison before leaving Earth. He had briefed her on something called Project Lighthouse, a classified program that had been running in secret for over 5 years. If things go wrong out there, Morrison had told her, "Don't panic. Just remember that Earth has friends, even if you can't see them yet." The communication system in her cell crackled to life, and Chancellor Crix's voice filled the small space. "I trust you're comfortable, Ambassador. Your trial will begin in 6 hours, and it will be broadcast across the galaxy. Your species will serve as an example of what happens to those who overreach their natural limits." Elena didn't respond. Instead, she closed her eyes and began to count. Morrison had told her to count to 3,000 if she ever found herself in this situation. She had thought he was joking at the time that Elena reached the number 2,847. She felt a subtle vibration through the station's hull. It was so faint that most beings would have dismissed it as routine machinery. But Elena had spent years aboard starships, and she knew the difference between mechanical vibration and something else entirely. Something was happening outside the station, something big enough to make a structure this massive shudder ever so slightly. She opened her eyes and smiled. Earth, it seemed, was about to make a statement of its own. The galactic storm arrives. The first sign that something was wrong came from the Nexus station's early warning sensors. In the station's command center, a Zephyrian technician stared at his display screen with growing confusion. Energy signatures were appearing throughout the system, massive ones that shouldn't have been there. The readings made no sense. Ships were materializing out of nowhere, as if they had been cloaked by technology far beyond anything in the galactic database. "Commander," the technician called out, his scaled hands trembling slightly as he worked his console. "We have multiple contacts dropping out of stealth mode. Unknown vessel classifications, unknown power signatures. They're surrounding the station." The command center erupted into activity as personnel from a dozen different species scrambled to understand what was happening. Commander Thale, a veteran architect whose crystalline body pulsed with nervous energy, moved to the central display. The tactical screen showed dozens of contacts forming a perfect sphere around the Nexus station. The vessels were sleek and predatory, with a design philosophy that emphasized function over the ornate aesthetics favored by most galactic civilizations. They were matte black, absorbing sensor sweeps rather than reflecting them, and they moved with a coordination that suggested advanced battle networking systems. "Are those human ships?" Thale asked, though the question seemed absurd even as he spoke it. Humanity barely had an interstellar presence. Their technology was considered primitive by galactic standards, their industrial capacity limited to their single star system. The idea that they could field a fleet of this size and sophistication was impossible. In her detention cell, Elena heard the alarm klaxons begin to sound throughout the station. She had reached the number 3,000 in her countdown, and right on schedule, the cavalry had arrived. The vibrations in the station's hull were getting stronger now, and through her small window, she could see the running lights of massive vessels taking up positions around the docking bays. The communication system in the assembly chamber crackled to life, and a new voice filled the air. It was human, female, with the crisp authority of someone accustomed to command. "This is Captain Sarah Chun of the Terran Defense Fleet. We are here for our ambassador. Release her immediately or face the consequences." In the Grand Assembly Chamber, the alien delegates were in chaos. The holographic displays showed the human fleet in all its terrifying glory. These weren't the crude chemical rockets and primitive fusion drives they had expected from humanity. These were vessels that incorporated technology the major powers couldn't even identify. The ships moved with impossible grace, their engines producing energy signatures that defied conventional physics. Chancellor Crick stood at his throne, his golden scales now pale with shock. "This is impossible," he hissed. "Human technology is decades behind our own. They couldn't have built these ships without our knowledge." But the evidence was right there in front of him, surrounding his station like a steel embrace. Captain Chen's voice echoed through the station again. "You have 60 seconds to release Ambassador Vasquez and provide her safe passage to her shuttle. Any attempt to harm her will be considered an act of war against Earth and all her allies." The word allies sent a ripple of confusion through the assembled delegates. What allies? Humanity was supposed to be isolated, friendless, desperate for acceptance into the galactic community. The answer came in the form of additional fleet elements dropping out of stealth. Ships bearing the markings of the Kepler Confederation, a group of independent colonies that had been struggling against oppression from the major powers. The vessels from the Frontier Alliance, representing dozens of smaller species who had been marginalized by the galactic establishment. Even ships from some of the core worlds, whose populations had grown tired of the corrupt tribunal system. Elena, still in her cell, could hear the panic in the voices of her guards. They were speaking in rapid Zephyrian, but she had learned enough of the language to understand the gist. The human fleet wasn't just surrounding the station, it was actively jamming communications and blocking all departure routes. No one was leaving until this situation was resolved. In the command center, Commander Thale was trying to make sense of the tactical situation. His sensors showed that the human ships possessed shielding technology that was somehow deflecting active scans. Their weapon systems were powered, but not locked on target, a show of restraint that was somehow more threatening than open aggression. Most disturbing of all, the ships were interfacing with the station's computer systems, casually bypassing security protocols that had taken decades to develop. "They're in our systems," one of the technicians reported, his voice barely above a whisper. "They have complete access to our databases, our communications, everything. It's like our security doesn't even exist to them." The implications were staggering. If humanity could slice through galactic encryption this easily, how long had they been watching, listening, learning? Captain Chen's voice returned, colder now. "Your time is up. Ambassador Vasquez will be released immediately, or we will demonstrate why Earth has no fear of your so-called tribunal." The threat hung in the air like a sword, and Elena could feel the entire station holding its breath. Chancellor Crix, faced with the impossible choice between his pride and his survival, finally gave the order. "Release the human. Now!" The detention cell's energy barrier flickered and died, and Elena stepped out into the corridor where her guards waited. They no longer looked at her with contempt. Instead, there was something that might have been respect, or perhaps fear. Elena made her way back through the station's corridors, now accompanied by a very different kind of escort. She could see alien personnel staring at her with new eyes. She wasn't just the representative of a primitive species anymore. She was the ambassador of a power that had just rewritten the rules of galactic politics in the span of an hour. The assembly chamber was in chaos when Elena arrived. Delegates were shouting in dozens of different languages, some demanding explanations, others trying to distance themselves from the charges that had been leveled against humanity. The holographic displays still showed the human fleet, now joined by even more vessels as word of the confrontation spread across the galaxy. Elena walked calmly to the center of the chamber, her bearing dignified despite the ordeal she had just endured. The restraint marks on her wrists were still visible, and she made no attempt to hide them. When she spoke, her voice carried clearly through the acoustic systems, and her words were broadcast across the galaxy. "You wanted to see humanity's true nature," Elena said, looking directly at Chancellor Crix. "You wanted to test our resolve, our capacity for violence, our willingness to submit to your authority." She gestured toward the displays showing the fleet. "This is humanity. We don't start fights, but we sure as hell finish them. And we never ever abandon our own." The chamber fell silent except for the hum of electronics and the distant vibration of massive ships holding position around the station. Elena could see the calculations going on behind alien eyes, the desperate attempts to understand how the balance of power had shifted so dramatically in such a short time. "For too long," Elena continued, "this tribunal has operated on the principle that might makes right, that older, more established civilizations have the authority to dictate terms to newer species, that primitive worlds should be grateful for whatever scraps of recognition you're willing to throw them." Her voice grew stronger with each word. "Today, that era ends." The implications of Elena's words were staggering. The human fleet wasn't just here to rescue one ambassador. It was here to fundamentally change the nature of galactic politics. As Elena stood in the center of the chamber, surrounded by the shocked faces of delegates who had underestimated humanity's resolve, she knew that the galaxy would never be the same. Outside, the Terran defense fleet maintained its perfect formation, a steel reminder that Earth had not come to the stars to beg for acceptance. They had come to take their place as equals, and they had brought the firepower to back up that claim. The new galactic order, the silence in the Grand Assembly Chamber, stretched for what felt like an eternity. Elena stood at the center of it all, her presence commanding despite her earlier humiliation. Around her, The most powerful beings in the galaxy struggled to process what they were witnessing. The holographic displays continued to show the human fleet, now numbering over 200 vessels of various sizes, all maintaining perfect formation around the Nexus station. Chancellor Crix was the first to break the silence, his voice hoarse with disbelief. This changes nothing. You may have brought ships, but you are still bound by galactic law. The charges against your species remain valid. His golden eyes swept the chamber, searching for support among the other delegates, but found only uncertainty and fear. Elena smiled, expression that held no warmth. Galactic law? She activated her personal holographic projector, filling the chamber with documents, recordings, and data streams. You mean the same galactic law that allowed you to fabricate evidence against Earth? The same law that permits the systematic oppression of developing species? The same law that makes a mockery of the very principles this tribunal claims to uphold. The evidence Elena displayed was devastating. Years of covert surveillance had revealed the depth of corruption within the galactic establishment. Trade, agreements designed to exploit weaker species, military interventions disguised as peacekeeping missions, the systematic suppression of technological development among promising civilizations. All of it documented, all of it undeniable. Impossible, whispered the architect delegate, her crystalline form flickering with stress patterns. How did you obtain classified tribunal records? But even as she asked the question, the answer was becoming clear. Humanity hadn't just been building ships in secret. They had been building an intelligence network that reached into the heart of galactic power. Elena gestured to the displays. Earth has been watching, learning, and preparing for this moment for years. We knew that joining the galactic community as equals would require more than just asking nicely. We knew we would have to prove our worth through strength. She paused, letting her words sink in. What you're seeing today isn't the result of months of preparation. It's the culmination of a decade-long project to ensure humanity's survival in a hostile galaxy. Captain Chen's voice echoed through the chamber again, but this time it was accompanied by visual communication. The human officer appeared on the main display, her uniform crisp and her expression professional. Ambassador Vasquez, the fleet stands ready to execute any orders you deem necessary. We have control of the station's critical systems and are prepared to ensure your safety by any means required. The implications were clear. The human fleet wasn't just surrounding the station, it had effectively captured it. The most secure facility in galactic space, the symbol of alien superiority and authority, was now under human control. The psychological impact was devastating. Elena nodded to Captain Chun before turning back to the assembled delegates. Here's what's going to happen, she said, her voice cutting through the chamber like a blade. The charges against Earth are hereby dismissed. Any species that wishes to continue diplomatic relations with humanity will publicly acknowledge that these charges were false and politically motivated. Chancellor Crix rose from his throne, his massive frame trembling with rage. You cannot dictate terms to the Galactic Tribunal. We have fleets of our own, armies that have maintained order for millennia. This display of force is temporary at best. But his words lacked conviction, and Elena could see the doubt in his eyes. Your fleets, Elena replied calmly, are currently experiencing significant technical difficulties. As if on cue, reports began flooding into the chamber from across the galaxy. Zephyrian battle groups found their navigation systems offline. Architect Command ships lost communication with their support vessels. The Hive Collective's swarm tactics were disrupted by mysterious interference patterns. The scope of humanity's preparation was becoming clear. They hadn't just built a fleet, they had developed the capability to neutralize the major powers' military advantages. Years of careful infiltration and technological development had given Earth the tools to level the playing field in ways the aliens had never imagined possible. Elena continued her address, her voice growing stronger with each word. But this isn't about conquest or revenge. Earth didn't come to the stars to become another empire built on oppression. We came to create something better. She gestured to the smaller species representatives, many of whom were watching with growing hope. The Kepler Confederation, the Frontier Alliance, the Free Colonies, all of these civilizations have suffered under the current system. Today, that ends. The chamber erupted in confused chatter as delegates tried to understand what Elena was proposing. The smaller species representatives were leaning forward in their seats, while the major powers looked increasingly concerned. This wasn't just a rescue mission anymore. It was a revolution. "We propose a new galactic compact," Elena announced, activating another set of holographic displays, one based on actual equality rather than the fiction of representation we see here, one where developing species are protected rather than exploited, one where military might serves justice rather than oppression. The document Elena displayed was comprehensive, clearly the result of years of careful planning and consultation with dozens of civilizations. It outlined a new system of galactic governance that distributed power more equitably, protected the rights of developing species, and established mechanisms for preventing the kind of corruption that had plagued the current system. Chancellor Crix slammed his clawed fist on his throne's armrest. "This is madness. You would destroy the order that has maintained peace for centuries." But his protest was drowned out by voices of support from the smaller species delegates. For the first time in their civilization's histories, they saw a path to genuine equality. Elena looked directly at Crix, her expression serious but not hostile. "The current order hasn't maintained peace, Chancellor. It's maintained your dominance. There's a difference." She gestured to the displays showing conflict zones throughout the galaxy. 17 active suppression campaigns. Over 40 species denied basic technological development rights. Trade imbalances so severe that entire civilizations live in effective slavery. This is the peace you're defending. The truth of Elena's words was undeniable. The major powers had maintained order through strength, but it was an order that served only themselves. The smaller civilizations had never been partners in galactic society. They had been subjects, tolerated only as long as they remained useful and compliant. Captain Chen's voice returned to the chamber. "Ambassador, we're receiving communication requests from over 60 different species. Word of today's events is spreading rapidly throughout the galaxy. Many civilizations are expressing interest in joining the new compact." The implications were staggering. Humanity's gambit was succeeding beyond even their most optimistic projections. Elena nodded, then addressed the chamber one final time. "The choice is yours. You can cling to the old system and find yourselves increasingly isolated as the galaxy moves forward without you. Or you can join us in building something better, something that serves all species, not just the powerful few." The vote, when it came, was closer than Elena had hoped, but decisive enough to matter. The smaller species voted overwhelmingly in favor of the new compact. Several of the medium powers, calculating that their long-term interests lay with the emerging coalition, also threw their support behind the proposal. Even some delegates from the major powers, perhaps recognizing the writing on the wall, voted to support the reforms. Chancellor Crix, faced with the collapse of everything he had worked to maintain, made one final desperate play. "The Zephyrian Empire will never bow to human demands. We will fight this illegal takeover with every ship at our disposal." But his threat rang hollow. His fleets were scattered and compromised, his allies abandoning him, his authority crumbling in real time. That Elena's response was measured and professional. "Earth has no desire for war with the Zephyrian Empire or any other civilization. But we will defend our allies and our principles. The choice of peace or conflict is yours to make." The ball was now in Crix's court, but they both knew he had no good options left in the end. It was Captain Chen who provided the final push. "Chancellor Crix, you should know that your personal records regarding the falsified charges against Earth have been transmitted to your own parliament. Your people are learning the truth about your actions today." The color drained from Crix's golden scales as he realized that his political survival was now in question. The session concluded with the formal establishment of the Galactic Democratic Council, a new governing body that would replace the old tribunal system. Elena was elected as its first Secretary General, a position that would allow her to guide the implementation of the reforms humanity had fought to achieve. As the delegates began to file out of the chamber, many stopping to speak with Elena and express their support for the new order, she reflected on the day's events. Earth had come to the Nexus Station as supplicants, hoping for acceptance into the galactic community. They were leaving as the architects of a new age of interstellar cooperation. The human fleet maintained its formation around the station for 3 more days, ensuring the peaceful transition of power and the safety of the new government. When they finally departed, it was not as conquerors leaving a subjugated territory, but as guardians who had established something worth protecting. Elena stood once again at the observation deck, watching the last of the human ships disappear into hyperspace. The galaxy looked the same as it had when she had first arrived, but she knew that everything had changed. Humanity had proven that new voices could reshape the stars, that justice could triumph over power, and that the future belonged to those brave enough to seize it. The message Earth had sent was clear. They had not come to the galaxy as beggars seeking scraps of recognition. They had come as equals, prepared to fight for their place and the places of others who had been denied their rightful voice. Today, the galaxy had listened. Tomorrow, they would all work together to build something better than what had come before. As Elena prepared for the long work of governing a galaxy, she smiled at the thought of what her species had accomplished. They had been mocked as primitives, dismissed as irrelevant, and betrayed by those who claimed to represent justice. But in the end, they had done what humans did best. They had adapted, overcome, and emerged stronger than ever before. The stars belonged to everyone now, and Elena Vasquez, ambassador turned revolutionary, would make sure they stayed that way.